Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Permit me to stand on the already established protocol. My name is Ladi Yakubu. I'm a postgraduate student from the Department of Communication and Language Arts, University of Ibadan, Oyo State, Nigeria. The title of my paper this morning is, I'll just go ahead and share my slides. Social Media and Mental Health of Women and Girls in Africa, the Responsibility of Governments. To begin with, the media, or to be more specific, social media has become the major, if not the most important preoccupation of many in the world today. It is such that it has revolutionized and upturned the way and manner humans relate. Many would even credit social media with the magic wand of offering such a simple but effective medium of exchange and interaction among humans in the world. According to a 2022 statistics from Woodward, 56.8% of the world's total population is active on social media. Now that amounts to 4.48 billion people. And the average time spent on social media is also estimated at 2 hours, 24 minutes, while the average person spends 144 minutes a day using social media. It is also the case that an average user spends 72 hours a month devoted to social media, which indicates a devotion of 5.7 years of an assumed 73-year lifespan to the single use of social media. It is also the case that studies have called attention to the negativities and iniquities arising from the use of social media. It is in this regard that analysts have described social media as a double-edged sword that gives much advantages to society and users, even while still encompassing a lot of disadvantages. And given that many people spend more than the estimated average, would suggest that some even have addiction, which is more like an unhealthy devotion to the use of social media, and that in itself is a sign of a mental health issue. As a matter of fact, over 210 million people worldwide suffer from social media addiction. That statistic is also from Woodward 2022. And researchers have also shown that teenagers' use of social media goes hand in hand with increased depression and lower levels of life satisfaction. Now, social media and mental health of women and girls. And beyond the effect of the use of social media on the mental health of users has also been its impact on women and girls, particularly. Now, many studies have shown that women and girls are impacted at a higher level compared to men and boys. Now, this is due to the design of the social media platforms to showcase pictures with beautiful faces, bright lights, and to generate instant emotion in relation to beauty, and personal presentation. This is something that would attract and entice young girls to be engaged on them. And for instance, content and posts about celebrities or even friends appearing thinner or curvier, wealthier, happier, and more attractive have the effect of surfacing insecurities, anxieties, and depression in vulnerable girls who in the long run tend to be under pressure to look like what they see online. Now, in all of this, girls then still find that the pressure to appear perfect online could be overwhelming, especially with the constant portrayal of life on social media, where everyone is always happy and going out with friends and doing fun things as a standard. As a consequence, this results to very negative self-perception, stress, and discouragement for most girls. It is also the case that this leads to depression, anxiety, loneliness, body dissatisfaction, which is the same thing as body image concerns, and in severe cases, suicidal thoughts. Now, bringing it down to Africa, the experience of the use of social media is not different in any significant way from the general experience of the world. Although social media came to Africa late, somehow late, and people in Africa did not, use social media as quickly as other developed areas of the world. Of course, due to deficiencies in infrastructure, it is still the case that social media is now becoming a daily part of life across the continent for a lot of people. Beyond that, it would even seem that the addiction fever is also growing more in Africa. Now, it is reported, for instance, that Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, and Kenya has grown beyond the world average at 4 hours, 7 minutes, 3 hours, 58 minutes, 3 hours, 43 minutes, and 3 hours, 3 minutes, respectively. Now, what does this all mean? By implication, our discussion about the impact of social media on mental health of girls also applies to girls in Africa. Indeed, it could even be said that whatever girls in other climes are experiencing with respect to social media and its negative effect on mental health also holds true for African women. So how then do we combat the negative impact of social media on mental health? Now, the revelation from whistleblowers scandalized the world in sensitizing it to the deceptive game social media platforms have been playing and continue to play with the life and mental health of users, especially that of young women. Now, on this basis, many called for caution and restraints in the use of social media, particularly for the young ones who are going to be thrilled and enamored by its offerings to guide against addiction. Now, in the United States, for instance, the testimony of Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen sparked months of news reports and congressional hearings of social media's impact on users' mental health. So this realization and thinking, that many big techs operate with almost, unchecked power and answers only to themselves has led to many proposals for new legislation to address the noxious effect of social media on the mental health of its users. There are proposals, for instance, to allow parents to be able to sue social media platforms for addictive tactics if they do not put in place structures and safeguards to, ensure that teens and girls do not spend and devote unduly long time to engagements on social media platforms. There are also proposals on regulations to check the level and kind of content that would, be permitted on social media platforms. Also, in the European Union, for instance, they are almost at the point of passing the Digital Service Act that would compel social media platforms to more aggressively moderate hate speech, disinformation, and other user-generated content, as well as advertisements that are likely to be injurious to teens, particularly young girls. Now, interestingly, some of those social media platforms are already responding positively to the regulatory initiatives from governments of this Western world, including safety measures on their platforms. Now, Facebook, for instance, has announced the introduction of a new structure and tool that would empower parents to monitor, regulate, and determine the length of time that their wards could spend on social media. And then there's also this new nudge feature that would encourage young users to, get away from content or particular themes that they are spending so much time on. And these things are also harmful to their health. Going further, what then is the responsibility of our government in Africa? Now, given the acknowledgement that social media platforms affect African girls as much as they affect girls in other climes, and that African girls are not immune from the deleterious effects of social media on their mental health, it will mean that governments in Africa also owe the responsibility to become more concerned with whatever negative consequences the platforms are having on their citizens with a view to respond appropriately. Now, this would especially be the case when we, realize that most social media platforms are not of African origin and are likely to are very unlikely to set great store by us here. So the consequences and the effect of their actions and functioning on users in Africa. So it is regrettable, however, that even the social media companies and platforms do not respond with promptness and agility up to compliance and instances of negative effects of social media operations on their African users. Now, perhaps because of the perceived and known lackadaisical attitude towards, our citizens here by governments. Now, for example, in response to the legislative activities on proposals to further, regulate the activities of social media companies and platforms, Facebook did not deem it necessary to include Africa in the first set of locations where the new changes would be introduced. They preferred instead to lump Africa with locations that would get these changes later. Now, evidently, the companies and platforms would not take anything from Africa as serious, with observing and even saying that our governments in Africa do not take their own citizens or treat them with so much seriousness. Now, but rather than African governments coming to rescue their citizens with appropriate social media regulations, they have been more concerned with stopping them from utilizing social media for interactions and exchanges. It is reported, for instance, that out of the 54 countries in Africa, 34 of them, or less than 60%, have blocked access to social media platforms since 2015. And this blockage and ban is done outside of the requirements of the law, just like what we saw in Nigeria, which ordered a ban on the operations of Twitter for around 6 months or more. Now, beyond ban and blockade by many of the African governments, Uganda has even decided to impose high tax on data to impose further costs of usage as part of restriction on social media usage. Now, it is also the case that there are no developed structures for the monitoring and regulation of the operations of social media platforms, especially in the absence of necessary laws and rules in many African countries. Now, having said that, the paper recommends that African governments have to be sensitized to acknowledge negative effects of social media on the mental health of its users, particularly young girls. Now, secondly, there's also the need to be more concerned, or should we say, be concerned than they are right now with the safety and the mental health and well-being of their citizens while using social media platforms. Now, thirdly, and most importantly, governments in Africa need to intervene with appropriate regulations and laws geared towards making the social media platforms a safe space for users' mental health. Now, lastly, they need to develop structures for the monitoring and regulation of the operations of social media platforms across the continent. Now, the overall aim is to be able to use the instrumentalities of law and regulations to check excesses of social media platforms and safeguard mental health of users in Africa, particularly women and girls. So in conclusion, the paper explores the reality of social media presence in Africa and the extent of its pernicious effects, just as in other locations, on the mental health of African women and girls. It also highlights and maps out areas for government action in order to bring the continuing presence and functioning of social media platforms in the continent to the level of responsibility we see in other countries, and to the level of responsibilities we see in other countries that have taken necessary actions in this regard in order to stop and prevent the persisting deleterious effects of the use of social media on the mental health of African women and girls. Thank you.